You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
Hello, I'm Fergal O'Keefe and you're very welcome to this special bonus festival episode. My guest this week is David Teevan, who is the founder of the Clonmel Junction Arts Festival, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this week, starting Saturday the 3rd of July to Sunday the 10th of July. David shares great tales today from his favourite travels to festivals around the world, including Malawi, Zambia, Iran, Canada and the Edinburgh Festival. I just wanted to let you know that I'm also delighted to say that I will be doing my first Travel Tales with Fergal live podcast next Tuesday, 6th of July, with novelist Louise Nealon. It's lunchtime live at 1 p.m. in the Festival Dome, and you can get free tickets to see online at junctionfestival.com. In this unique conversation, novelist Louise Nealon will discuss her experiences in the last year of the writing process, getting a publisher, getting published, and going to number one in the bestseller charts for her debut novel Snowflake. Keep an eye out on my website, Travel Tales with Fergal, for details of Season 3 of Travel Tales with Fergal coming out towards the end of the summer. I already have some brilliant interviews done and I can't wait to share them with you later this summer. Now let's hear from David Teevan about his great international travels to festivals around the world. David Teevan, you're very welcome to the podcast. We're doing a very special Junction special. Your 5 picks are all connected with the Junction Festival, but it's all over the world, so I'm really looking forward to it. You're very welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Fergal. It's nice to be here.
So your very first one, which I was hoping that you were going to pick, actually, because I love the place as well. So your first pick.
Well, indeed. Just to put it in context a little bit, I was the director of Junction Festival for 15 years, and it was an organisation that I set up in Clonmel in 2001 for the first Junction Festival. And the next year I went over to, it was a great success, very small event with just five events. And the next year I realized I was going to need to go looking for work for the next festival. And I went to Holland and I brought over a wonderful show from Holland. I had a friend who was a curator or a presenter over there, and he showed me a few shows over there. I selected one and brought them over. And that was when I realized that part of the job of running a festival, I mean, I was just figuring out what a festival director's job was, as I went along. And when I realized that part of the job was to go what I call shopping, so that was to go and find work to bring to the festival. So throughout the next 14 years, I would travel 4, 5, 7 times a year, and the trips were usually about 4 or 5 days long. And some of them were to see specific work where I had a friend or a colleague who wanted to invite me over, or felt there was something that was interesting, or there was work by a company that I knew and liked and I wanted to see. But a lot of the time I went to trade fairs. What I would consider trade fairs. So in the commercial sector, they would be considered trade fairs, but basically they were festivals. So, and the king among them all, or one of the kings, is the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And it's on every August, although it's like all festivals and performing arts, it's been closed last year and will be in some modified form this year. But during those years, 2001, 2015, I went over and I would spend 5 days there, and I would go to 5 or 6 shows a day. I found if I went to 6 shows, it was just too much. It was exhausting. I remember sitting with a colleague at having lunch one day, and we were expressing how tiring it was going to see 5 or 6 shows. And the couple next door to us sort of said, they were lovely. And they said, they were an English couple, and they said, excuse me, don't mind me interrupting, but, we were just listening to conversation and laughing because we save all year to come to Edinburgh, and we have to go through the program because we will go to 2 shows a day. And we were laughing at your giving out about having to go to 5 or 6 shows. So it kind of put that in perspective. And I always knew how lucky we were. A lot of the shows we would have been on invited tickets. But also it was and this is the lovely thing about all of these adventures that you've invited me to talk about, was that when I traveled, I would meet colleagues who do similar, who were running festivals all over the world or running theaters. I would meet artists, and it was just an incredibly enriching few days. I used to feed on that, seeing the work. Yes, it was about finding shows for the festival in Clonmel, but it was also about understanding what was going on globally in terms of arts and entertainment and becoming, staying current. So yes, Edinburgh, and I know that you had a different Edinburgh to me, because you're a comedy man. I was more of a theatre man. Although I'd see some comedy, and I'm sure you saw some theatre. The comedy festival runs, the theatre festival runs. There's a book festival. It's just festival city for the month, as you know. So I would go, and I would and the accommodation is always a big issue in Edinburgh. And I learned over the years to leave it till the last minute, and then just send out an email to my colleagues and anybody I knew going to Edinburgh saying, anyone got a spare room? And invariably I got lucky and got myself a room with colleagues. So it was a lot about that, meeting with friends and colleagues and seeing terrific shows. But I mean, the advantage of the role I played as a festival director was I would be part of this community of professional presenters. So when I arrived in Edinburgh, I'd hook up with somebody who's been there for a few days, and I'd find out what's worth going to see. And then the big challenge was, how do you get a ticket for a show that's sold out? There were techniques you learned, arriving at the venue and going, "Oh, my name is David Teevan. There should be a ticket for me here," and just waiting while the baffled said, "Oh, we don't have a ticket." And I said, "Oh, no, there was certainly a ticket. I was promised a ticket."
I do you know how I learned that? I was at a show, and a guy I know who's big into the arts in Ennis. And I was standing there trying to get a ticket if one came available, and he just scoots straight past and goes, I'm late, and just walks straight in. And he had no ticket. And and I talked to him afterwards, that he said he used to do, just go straight in.
So you learn, and but it was lots of fun, and I one of the things the year after I left the festival, when it came round, there was a sort of sadness in me that I had that I wasn't part of that community anymore, and the privileges had been handed in with the resignation. So.
But it wasn't, it's not just the shows. I mean, one thing I always noticed being there, and I always thought of you, because I could see things that you brought to Clonmel, the outdoor areas and, the atmosphere around the town. It's electric during the festival, isn't it, in Edinburgh? But
I mean, that's what I was saying. This travel that I did for those 15 years was about nourishing me and my creativity, so that as a director, I was able to bring those ideas. Sometimes it was taking a bit of this and a bit of that, and how can I make that? And does it? Sometimes it wasn't relevant for Clonmel, because as a festival director, you're trying to find what is. I knew Clonmel very well, so it was what's relevant for Clonmel, what can I afford? I mean, that was another thing I used to always try and do. Is a lot of the Irish would go to Travers Theatre. Irish festival directors would go to, and the theatre makers would hang around in Travers. And I was always trying to find the shows that Galway Arts Festival hadn't found. So that, because I couldn't afford to compete with them, so I was kind of trying to find, going off piste, as you would say, and trying to hunt out the next big thing that hasn't been discovered. Because once it is, I mean, it's a great place to bring a show if it's a great show. Like something like Pat Kinnivan has been touring all over the world. I know you would know Pat Kinnivan and his work, the Irish theatre maker. So. He's done his shows in Edinburgh. It's been successful, and he has toured all over the world on the basis of that, because it's a place to get seen. So yeah, Edinburgh was one of definitely my favorite. I've never been to Edinburgh when a festival wasn't on, so they tell me it's a very different city. But I have lots and lots of happy memories and fun times.
And was then Edinburgh that brought you to your next one, to Womad and Womex?
Well,
How did that work?
No, that was slightly different. Because I suppose the two elements of Junction Festival, as you'd be well aware, would be that it was the theatre program and the music program were sort of at the core of it, and my own I suppose Keela would have been a big influence in me in terms of musically, and it was I think Colm O'Snuddy from Keela who said to me that I should go to Womex, and Womex is a trade fair. It's slightly different to Edinburgh in that. Well, it's different in many ways. It's focused on world music, but it's a 3-day event, and you have a big trade stand fair where you have stalls, and you can go around the stalls, and then every evening you have different world music bands playing. So you have bands from all over the world, sometimes Irish bands, but Asian bands, African bands, Scandinavian bands, whatever. A lot of indigenous musics, which I loved. And the lovely thing about it is it's on it will be on in one city for 2 or 3 years, and then it will move to another city. So the first time I went, it was in Seville, and it was incredibly badly organized, the registration. And all of the regulars to Womex, and Womex is a sort of a German institution, like the original was in Germany. We know the Germans are terribly efficient, and the Spaniards were very relaxed. And there was this queue for about 3 hours as you waited to register, and people were giving out about it for the 3 days, but I had nothing to complain about, because I met I was standing next to a Malaysian woman my age who ran a festival in the rainforest of Borneo. We talked about our festivals, but then we talked about other stuff because we were there for 3 hours, and I actually became very good friends with Yung Ling. And over the years of returning to Womex, we would always have dinner or and exchange notes. So that year I recommended a band called Yelembe that had been to Junction, and I introduced her to their manager, and she introduced me to a band, and I brought them to the festival. So we kind of created this like little swap thing, where because we had similar taste in music, and a lovely other thing that came out of that was that when my daughter Chloe, who had worked on the festival in Clonmel, was traveling in Asia after she took a gap year and was traveling in Asia. She went and volunteered on Yung Ling's festival in Borneo. So I haven't been to Borneo, but my daughter was there, and she got the lovely job of being artist liaison, and which meant sort of sitting in the mini bus and bringing the artists to this venue and watching this concert that had finished at 2:00 in the morning, and then coming back to the hotel where they were all staying, where they partied by the pool until dawn. So that's not a memory of mine, but it came from,
I like that one,
from Womex. And I think Womex is again, like the sort of community of producers in the community of producers in Edinburgh, there was a community of producers and presenters in Womex that I got to know, and I would come back to each year, and you'd find out who was on your level in terms of budgets, and who had similar tastes to you, and I got to see some great music. So over the years, there was the experience in Seville, and then we moved on to there was one year it was in Newcastle, and then it was in Copenhagen for a couple of years. So again, it was a way that you could get to know a city, and you could
but you went back a few years.
So you go back for a couple of years, so you get to know where was your favorite cafe, and then it would move on and you have a new experience. So that was, yes. And of course the music, I mean, I got to see Tinarawan, that wonderful band from the Tuareg tribe, and this was just before they became, I mean, then when they played in Ireland, they were supporting the Rolling Stones in Slane. So they kind of went into a different stratosphere very, very quickly. Are
they amazing to see them?
I have that was the first year I was in Womad, and I have this wonderful memory of that concert, of their concert, and you could tell they were in a different league. And I would always, a lot of the African bands that I would have brought to Clonmel over the years, I would have come across at Womad. You would have 4 or 5 different concert halls or venues, and you'd walk between them. So you catch a bit of this band, and then you go and see another band, and all the time, you've got this encounter with your colleagues. So again, I would come home exhausted from this trip, and I had but one doesn't get much sympathy when one comes home from an event like that. It was my sister-in-law's father was a travel writer, so he used to go to a holiday resort to do his work. And when he came home, he found the same thing. He would find it, he'd be tired when he came home, but the perception is you're on holidays, but the reality is that you're turned on. You're trying to make good choices, and you're meeting and you're talking. So while I wouldn't trade it for a moment, there were great experiences. Yes, you'd come home and you'd be exhausted, and you'd have a lot of the follow-up and to try and make sure that the event happened well.
And Seville was your favourite of them, was it?
I think of the Womex visits, I think my least favourite was probably Essen in Germany. Yeah, they were good trips, and a lot of it was about the communities. But they were my basic trade fairs. But what happened after a number of years is through meeting colleagues, I started to get invited elsewhere. And over the years, I went to Spain quite a bit, Barcelona, particularly Catalonia, visited Lithuania and France and Belgium, and all. I went back to Holland many times. So that there was a lot of travel in Europe. But when the invitations started coming from further afield, that was really, really nice. And one of the most, I think, profound experiences I had in terms of that professional time I met up with a group called Music Crossroads in Womex, and they organized a youth music exchange. They organized this. They had this organization in 5 South African countries. So there was Tanzania, Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And they were running music programs down there for young musicians. And then every year they would have a competition, a festival in one of these countries, and they would select one band from the 5 countries, and they would tour the band in Europe. And these were young bands, so they were sort of they would be their first tour away from home. And I invited one of those bands to Clonmel, and it was a band called Body, Mind, and Soul from Malawi. And I came up with the idea of having one of the local bands in Clonmel be their hosts and look after them. And there were 3 young musicians, Owen Halley, Simon Dargan, and Calvin Cook. And they had a band called Super Blondes. And I asked them, would they look after the band from Malawi? And when the band arrived in the minibus, the boys were there, and they kind of disappeared fairly quickly. And I thought, oh, that's okay, they're being looked after. Apparently they stayed up until 3:00 in the morning in Clonmel, playing, partying and making music. And this lovely bond between these 2 bands. And by the end of the week, the 2 bands at the finale concert, they played a few tunes together. So what subsequent to that, the Music Crossroads organization invited me and the 3 young boys from Clonmel to go to Malawi to play at the festival down there and to do the collaboration and to show what we had done. So with support from Culture Ireland, we were able to travel there, me and the 3 young fellas. I think the boys were 18 at the time, 19 maybe. So they were very young. And this was a long, long way. We had to go to Dubai and then to Johannesburg and then fly up to Malawi. And it was certainly the most extraordinary trip we had. Again, there was a small number of international colleagues there, some of whom I would know. I became good friends with Burak, a copyrights lawyer from a Turkish man who lives in Brussels, and to this day, I still keep in touch with him. But we got to play at the festival, and I was part of the jury that judged the selection of bands that were there this year. And then the winning band was toured in Europe the following year and also came to Junction Festival. And this time I hooked up with a band called Gwicha, which was a traditional Irish band. And I asked the traditional Irish band, so we went back to Zambia that year. So for 2 years, I got to visit Africa with young musicians. And I think for both the Gwicha boys and girl, and for the Malawi, the Super Blondes, I think for the young musicians, they were phenomenally important, because it came at a point in their life where, they were, young. And to have that experience, I know with the Gwicha, they were fabulous musicians, and they had been at the Academy of World Music in Limerick, so they were very, very proficient players. And when we were out in Africa, I said to them, I said, but like many traditional Irish bands, they sort of played looking inwards. They were used to that they sort of very much as a traditional Irish music session where people look inwards. And when you're on a stage, that doesn't look good. So when I was down in there, I said to them, you guys are wonderful musicians. There's nothing I can teach you about music, because that's not my thing, but I know the stage. And I think you do well to watch these African lads and lasses, because they get up on stage and they own the stage. They perform with such, and a lot of them had very limited musical skills, and very, their instruments were, they were playing with very limited technical supports. But when they got on stage, they had this amazing charisma, and they went forward. And about 6 months after the trip to Malawi or Zambia with Gwicha, I got a lovely email from the band saying they had just been awarded the best performers at a festival, because they had trying to take on board the something from their trip to Africa. But I mean, in terms of, I suppose there was a moment there. We had a few days after the festival in Zambia, and I was invited to bring the Irish musicians over to Malawi to do some work and to have them do some workshops with the Malawi musicians. So having become friends with the director in Malawi the previous year. So we drove over the following day after the festival, and we spent a few days there, and we had a few days off. So we went down to Lake Malawi, and I thought it was, we'd done 2 weeks hard work, so we were going to have a weekend of holidaying. And we had, Lake Malawi is absolutely beautiful. We went to a place called, I think it was called Paradise Beach. And it was just where there was, and we did a few concerts there. But there was a pub owned by a man from Liverpool. So we did a couple of concerts there. And then the lads asked me, did we want to go? There was a place where we could hire canoes. And I don't know whether, I think I'd seen two of them hired a canoe one day, and I said to them the next day, hey, let's hire the canoes and go out to the island. And they said, oh yeah, it's a great idea. So we hired 4 canoes. And there was one of them who was a bit nervous. I said, will you get in the canoe with me? I mean, I'm do a lot of canoeing. So, we'll be fine. And it was very calm. There were little ripples on the surface. And halfway across, maybe 2/3 of the way across, the canoe in front of me with 2 lads in it toppled over, and they fell into the water. Now we had life jackets on, but one of them decided that was when he was going to tell me he couldn't swim. So he started panicking and pulling at the canoe and filling the canoe with water. And the other guy was going, Dave, Dave. And I'm going, just stop. So it was a very, very scary moment. And I managed to get him to calm down and hold on to the back of our canoe and canoed into the bay. And thankfully a boat saw what was happening and came over and picked up the other lad who had been incredibly brave. So I had this awful moment of thinking, like, this is just too much responsibility. And why didn't you tell me you couldn't swim?
Yeah.
But we were very lucky, and I've always remember that moment and give thanks to the gods of Lake Malawi for letting us all come home safely.
And is it a touristy place? Like, was the lake a touristy place, or
Yeah. I mean, I found myself tourism in Africa was a strange thing. I was very glad I was there working, and it also gave me the opportunity to encounter African men who were my age, who had jobs. So there was a certain sense of parity in our, Matthews, who worked in Music Crossroads in Malawi, and a friend of his from the Ministry of Arts were able to go out. We were able to talk about, relevant things. I mean, the poverty, the difference in wealth between, Malawi, it's one of the poorest countries in the world, and Ireland is phenomenal. And my presence there was a symbol of my wealth and my privilege. So I was very acutely aware of that, and I felt that the justification for me being there was that youth musical exchange, that we were bringing something. But the history of colonialism in Africa is just so evident. It has impacted, it has created the countries that are there today. And although Ireland was not a colonizer, I think we're part of Western Europe, and I think no, Ireland wasn't a colonizer, but many Irish were involved in colonial practice, and we as a nation have benefited from the prosperity of Europe. So I don't think we can avoid that, and so it's very complex. I know you had in a previous episode, Moncon was talking about something similar. And I think traveling. So yes, there is tourism in Africa. Of course there is. And tourists bring money with them. So just like in Ireland, tourism is important. I didn't feel I was very comfortable being a tourist there. And I wouldn't visit as a tourist, but I'd certainly would be delighted to engage in sort of those kind of exchanges where I certainly know the young men and the woman, because Gitcha had a female singer, Anya. So I just know that they benefited hugely from their exposure to on those experiences. I certainly felt I learned a huge amount, and I think it kind of shifted my sense of global responsibility, and just that we as a wealthy first world nation have. So I hope. Still in touch with some of the band's members from Malawi, which is nice, and we've been able to do a few things to help them out over the years. One of them ended up marrying a girl from Scotland and is doing rather well as a musician in Scotland. But some of them are back in Malawi, and life is tough. So,
it's funny. You actually gave me a love of African music. I only taught that while you were saying that. It's funny. I'm always listening to African playlists on the radio, on Apple Music, and the kids would be listening on, throwing their eyes up to heaven. But that was actually from you. I mean, you love it, don't you?
I love it. West African, more than the music of South. I mean, the culture of Malawi, for example, was decimated by slavery, and these were slave traders coming from Arabia rather than from Europe and America. So a lot of the indigenous cultures were there was very little indigenous culture there. But West Africa, the music of West Africa, and yes, I do love it, and I did. Bring many West African bands to Clonmel, and I'm delighted to hear you saying that. And hopefully, your children will be, when they're a little older, will get it. Certainly, my kids put up with our music, and there were years when they bemoaned it, but they're a bit older than yours, and now they'll be sending me links and going, "Hey, Dad, have you heard of this band?" But I think there's something very joyous and there's something very visceral about the West African music that just gets you moving, and I think that joy of dancing, it doesn't happen in my head. African music happens deep in my belly, exactly. And yes, we were able to share that. In Clonmel and with Clonmel, and there's nothing nicer than seeing a big cohort of your neighbours and friends and people you meet in your daily life dancing and smiling. Exactly. That was certainly my visits to Africa were great, and I was delighted that I was able to bring all of the musicians home.
Yeah.
Jammed restaurants, packed beaches and queues for queues. No thanks. Isn't the point of a getaway to, get away? So here's the inside tip. With the Golden Vale, incredible hiking, 2 blueways and gorgeous lakeside villages, Tipperary has it all. Visit the Mitchelstown Caves, walk the Knockmeal Downs or explore the Butler Trail. Take it easy while uncovering ancient castles and hidden secrets. Tipperary is unspoilt and waiting for you. Visit tipperary.com, supported by the Tipperary LCDC under the Leader programme.
That probably leads us into Iran.
Well, I mean, I suppose that was the most remarkable of all of the visits I made over the years. I think it was about November, I got an email. And it seemed like a poorly written email, or like it didn't seem on an official email. I think you get a sense when an email comes, but it was basically asking me, did I want to come to the Fajr Festival in Tehran in February? And I'm going, well, yeah. So I kind of sent a speculative email back, sort of saying, yes, I'd be delighted. And then they sent back an email and they said, well, if you... we can provide you with accommodation, and so you just need to get a visa and we'll pick you up at the airport. And I was rather cheeky and wrote back to say that my travel budget was somewhat diminished and I'm not sure that I'd be able to cover the flights. And they wrote back to say that they'd send me the ticket as well. So wow. I said, well, there was a very nice offer, and the opportunity to go to Iran was quite extraordinary. So I arrived, I think, at 2 a.m, or the flights, and I couldn't get any money in advance. When you're traveling, you always want to get some money, but you couldn't get Iranian currency outside of Iran. So I was arriving in. I didn't speak Persian. I didn't know where I was going to stay. I was just told I would be met at the airport. It was very vague. And I was very, very nervous when I arrived in Tehran. And I was going through the airport, and the airport appeared chaotic. I'm sure there was a different kind of sense of order in there, but it appeared quite chaotic. And I realized that I was in a very strange place because I was in this foreign airport and I had really no idea where I was going. And then, thankfully, when I got to the other side of it, there was a man with a sign saying, Mr. Teevan. It's like, phew. The other thing I noticed when I arrive in Tehran is my breathing, the breathing. Tehran is in a bowl, and it's at very high. I think it's at 1,000 feet, and it's in a bowl surrounded by mountains. So it's on a plateau in among the mountains, and the air is very thin. And I could feel it in my lungs. As soon as I arrived, I was like, oh my gosh, that's very strange. But I went out with this man, and he was driving a Fiesta. And it wouldn't have been an up-to-date Fiesta. And I got in, and he was booting down the road in this tiny little car, and the road was really, really wide. And so it was so I got to the hotel, went in, and I again, just the aesthetic, the decor was something I was unfamiliar. So I woke up the next morning and I went downstairs, not knowing where the venue was. All I knew was it was the Fajr Festival. And I'm in the foyer. It was kind of 8:30 in the morning, and I'm wondering what's going on. And eventually I saw somebody who I thought kind of looked arty, and thought maybe he's here for the same thing. And I went over to him, and he was the South African festival director. So we just started chatting, and eventually this big bear of a man came out, and he was somebody I had met briefly. I had met him for about 5 minutes at an event in Canada the previous year, and we'd exchanged cards. And that's when I realized that's how I had got the invite. It's so lovely to see you, David. And it was quite the most extraordinary trip. So in the beginning, we were set up there was about 30 of us there, and we were put into 3 groups. There were the British contingent, who had their own tour guide and security, and they had extra security. And then there was the Europeans and then there was the English speakers. So I was put with the Canadians, and I know one Dutch and one German who decided we were going to be more fun, so they came with our group, and a couple of South Americans. And the first day I went out with two of the Canadians for a walk, and there was nothing happening the first day. And this was the day of the Fajr. This was the parade. Every year they have a parade to commemorate the Ayatollah Khomeini's return after the fall of the Shah. And they had the roads were full of these people making a procession into the center where the current prime minister was going to speak. And they were shouting and with their chanting. And one of the Canadians was Persian by birth, spoke Persian. So we asked him, Michael, and I said, well, what are they saying? And he said, debt to the Israelis, debt to the Americans, debt to the British. That was what the chant was. And I'm going, I'm Irish. And and the Canadians going, I'm Canadian. So we had this. And then the next day, I mean, it was quite a powerful experience, that whole experience. I mean, I jest, but just the experience of that, being in such an alien and such a different kind of environment, and there was a level of aggression around, or in that chanting, and it was focused on, okay, so Britain and America and Israel, but basically the West again, this thing of being a Westerner, and but anyway, the next day when they came with the lanyards, and when you go to festivals, you get a lanyard with which gives you your access to areas, and they came along with our lanyards, and all of the lanyards said your name and your nationality, and mine said David Teevan, Great Britain. Now, to put in context, during the hunger strikes, when Bobby Sands was on his hunger strike, the Iranians changed the name of the street that the British embassy is on to Bobby Sands Avenue. So that the address of the British embassy in Iran was the British Embassy, Bobby Sands Avenue. Now, the British closed up that gate and opened a gate on a different street to change the name of it. So there was this was playing in my mind, but what also the chant from the day before and I mean, the British group, as I said, they had extra security. I mean, there was a certain vulnerability. And I'm like, no, we fought for our independence for 800 years. I want to be David Teevan, Ireland. And so for a day, I hadn't got a lanyard until thankfully they did. And I'm I still have it hanging here in my office. It was like, that was an identity. That was when being Irish meant an awful lot to me. But the trip was amazing. I mean, Persia is this extraordinary, rich culture that goes back 5,000 years, and it was at the center of the Silk Road, and the Persian people are an incredibly I suppose they've had a very sophisticated culture for a long time, and yet the world in which they're living now is a world that, the color that comes to mind is gray. It was dark. And when we were there, we went each day to this college where we would have different encounters, and there were some sharings of theatre, and we had talks, and then in the afternoon and the evening we would go out into the town and we would go to different plays, and the work I saw was extraordinary. In fact, I did bring a show to Clonmel because it had been such an extraordinary experience for me. But I think on the third day we were there, we used to go out for lunch, and when we came down at college at lunchtime, there were armed guards at the gate, and we weren't allowed out. So we were basically, for about 4 hours, we were under house arrest. Now they said it was for our protection, because basically that was the year of the Arab Spring. When there had been the revolt in Tunisia and in Egypt, and that afternoon there had been a student rising in the town square in Tehran, and it had been crushed immediately. And when we came out, eventually after 4 hours, when we were let out, there were security details on every street corner of So I've never seen it before. They had like this armor, like plastic armor, and they had trial motorbikes, and they were fully armed every street corner. So it was pretty shocking. And so the contrast between this world that we experienced and the rich, extraordinary rich culture that was there. And when we went to the plays, we were let in. We were the dignitaries. We were sitting down, and then they let in the locals, and they would. Wow. They came in their throngs, and there was the health and safety hadn't arrived, because when all the seats were full, they sat on the aisle, and then they sat on the edge of the stage. And at one show, I saw them, and they were sitting along on the side of the stage, and it just added an extraordinary atmosphere to the events. And as I say, when I came back, I just felt I really, really wanted to share some of that with the community in Clonmel, because that's what my trips were about. It was about going and discovering the world and seeing what I could share. And there was this one play which I had seen, which was this 3 young women, and they performed. It was a sort of, again, visual. It wasn't dependent on text, but so there was various different scenes that they went through, and I didn't quite understand it, but I felt that it evoked the feelings I had when I was there. So we brought that over, and they did 2 shows in Clonmel. So I felt I had fulfilled my responsibility to the Iranian government, who had trusted me and who paid for my flight, and we were able to give them. To share some of that culture, because the differences that separate us are I think as human beings are very small, and that's the wonderful thing about the opportunity of traveling is realizing that. The political differences are huge, but those human differences, and having the opportunity in these travels to meet with people from around the world is something that I cherish. Now that the last year, none of us have been traveling, but my work now doesn't take me out of Ireland. I do travel in Ireland, but not so much internationally now.
And anyone I talk to who talks about Iran says the people there are amazing, very warm, very friendly. Did you find that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was extraordinary. The one thing I would say is that they tend to have 2 faces, because they have the face that they present in public, and then they have the face, at home. So it's not until you go behind closed doors that they reveal themselves, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to reveal yourself in public, and we have to be very grateful for, the democracy. That we live in, and to have the freedom to express yourself. And the opportunity to debate ideas is a real privilege.
And that just brings me on to Canada, because speaking of privilege, you said you've been there many times, but the one that you picked sounds amazing. So,
well, actually, it was even after I had left Junction Festival. I had been going over to Canada quite often. I have some very good friends over there. I'd been to Ottawa and Montreal. I loved Montreal because I could use my limited French, and they really appreciated that. And there's some extraordinary performing arts in Montreal. And I had many visits to Ottawa, or to Vancouver. There's a lovely festival called Push there in the beginning of the year, and so I used to go there on an annual basis towards the end. But there was another festival that, a bit like Womex, used to move around to different places each year. And the year after I left, it was in Whitehorse, which is in the Yukon. So that's above the Arctic Circle. It's way, way, way up there. It's very far north, and I couldn't pass up on that. And when the director invited me, I said, but I'm not working in the job. And she said, David, we want you to come. And I said, well, okay, okay. So we flew out there. I flew out there, and I think there were a couple of colleagues from Ireland who were there as well. And it really was, it was so beautiful. Now it's 23 hours of daylight at that time of year. It's at this time of year. So it's at this time of year, the festival. And so I think that it's such a strange, to consider what it would be like in the winter when you've got 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours where it's vaguely daylight. It never really gets bright in the wintertime. But they said that because of that, you've got all this activity in the winter where people, are contained within their homes, and they're very, very creative. And then they come out in the summertime when the weather is good, and all this creativity just bursts out. So we did one event, which we arrived, I think, along at 10 o'clock or 11 at night. This was because they wanted it to be somewhat dark. And it was, we walked through this wood. And as we walked through the wood, we encountered various different art events. So there was, I remember a violinist who played a short piece that they had composed, and they had there was another place where they were cooking little tastes of food. So you stopped and you had that, and there was a storyteller, and there was a piece of theatre, and then at the end you came back and there was a fire, and there was nighttime at that stage. So again, this wasn't something I was going to bring to Ireland, but it's an idea that sticks with me, and that someday I might get to realize. But I think on our last night we were there, I also did this wonderful show, which was an audio show. So I went and I was given a mobile phone, Canadian mobile phone, and a headset, and as the piece of work, or the experience, was about listening to the audio instructions and as you walked through this town of Whitehorse. But at the same time I was doing this, somebody in Toronto was also doing a similar walking, was doing the show with me. So while the show was going on, I was having an experience and looking at this environment around me in Whitehorse, and they were having an experience in Toronto. And there were moments where we exchanged, where the line opened and we talked to each other, and then we went into our world. And I just thought that was a lovely idea, because so we were sharing our experience. So it was having a solo experience, but sharing it with somebody along the way, and somebody you never met. So at the end of it, I sat down and had a lovely long chat with this person, causing great consternation because they were waiting on the phone for the next customer. And and then on the last night we were there, I remember going to a show in a bar, which also had food involved in it. So you were served food during the show, and we came out at midnight, and it was daylight. And this was just quite disconcerting in a certain way, but quite lovely. And we went for a walk along by the Yukon River, and we sat down by the river, and I think we had brought a beer with us, and we had a beer at sort of midnight. And then there was a gig starting. So we went into the gig just as the sun was setting. And we came out an hour later after dancing for an hour, and the sun was rising.
Wow.
So there was quite a in terms of your expectations, this was quite wonderful. So
yeah. So your happy place then. I have to ask you this. If you close your eyes and take 4 deep breaths, where would your happy place be, and why?
Well, I know this is a travel blog or a podcast, but it doesn't. It's and having spoken about these wonderful adventures I've had around the world, and the privilege to be able to travel. My happy place is about 30 meters from where I'm sitting in my back garden. My granddad was a great gardener, and he gave me the love of gardening when I was very young. I was gardening with him when I was 6, 7, and he grew tomatoes that I've never tasted a tomato as sweet as the ones he grew. And I've been gardening ever since. And in fact, when I lived in New York, I used to grow tomatoes on my fire escape because I need to garden. And when we settled in Tipperary in we came to Tipperary in 1988, and we moved to this house in 1990. And one of the first things I did was establish a vegetable garden. And there's a spot where I sit reading or contemplating life. But that's it's a place I need. That it's a place where I get my strength and from tranquility. It's also a place that feeds us, which I always think is very nice. I mean, there are flowers that creep in. My partner Teresa has sort of unconventional gardening style and plonks flowers in among vegetables, which is not something my granddad would have done. But I've adopted. I think she's right. And the lovely thing is actually that I have my granddad's hoe and his spade. So when I'm out gardening there, I use his tools. So it's a lovely connection to my heritage, and I'm hoping that I can pass it on to maybe a grandchild somewhere down the line who might be interested. But yeah, definitely, that's. I'm lucky; it's very close. I don't have to travel very far, and I can visit it every day.
Listening to David Teevan there has really got me looking forward to the Clonmel Junction Festival again this year. And again, all the details, all the programmes are on junctionfestival.com. And also, I have done a podcast for the Clonmel Junction Festival, and it is on all available platforms. Just look up Clonmel Junction Arts Festival. I would ask if you could please subscribe to Apple Podcast so a new episode will appear in your library every week. I would also really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review, as it helps others to discover this podcast. To find out who's on every Tuesday, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Travel Tales with Fergal. Stay safe and keep dreaming of future travels.
Travel Tales with Fergal.